All right, so you've probably never actually seen one of these things, but I guarantee you use billions, yes, billions of them every single day. We're talking about the absolute bedrock of our entire digital world, the MOSFET. And today, we're going to pull back the curtain and demystify this tiny little switch that, well, makes pretty much everything possible.
So, let me ask you a question. How would you control a massive river of electricity using almost no energy at all? I mean, think about it. It sounds impossible, right? But that's the whole magic trick behind the MOSFET. It's basically a tiny electrical switch that has absolutely no moving parts. And that long name? Metal-Oxide-Semiconductor Field Effect Transistor? Don't worry, we're going to break down what all that means.
Okay, so to really get how this thing works, we've got to look at its anatomy. We'll start with its default state, when it's just sitting there turned off. Because honestly, the real genius is just in how all the different pieces are put together.
All right, so what you're looking at here is a common type of MOSFET called an NMOS. And the best way to think about it is like a little sandwich. The bread on the bottom, that's our substrate. It's made of what we call P-type silicon, which just means it's got a bunch of positive charges hanging around. Then, baked into that substrate, you've got these two little pockets of N-type silicon. These are our source and drain, and they're packed with extra electrons, so they have a negative charge. And then sitting right on top, you have the gate. But, and this is super important, it's separated from everything else by this ultra-thin layer of oxide, which is an insulator. That's why you'll sometimes hear these called insulated gate devices.
So, let's say we don't apply any voltage to that gate. What happens? Well, absolutely nothing. The path between the source and the drain is totally blocked. It's like there's a giant wall, or actually two walls back to back, that electricity just can't cross. We're talking about a resistance of something like 10 to the power of 12 ohms. That's a trillion ohms. So for all intents and purposes, it's a perfect open switch. It's off.
Okay, so the switch is off. Now for the really cool part. How do we flip it on? We have to somehow create a pathway, a little bridge for electrons to cross, right where one didn't exist a moment ago.
And this is where that field effect part of the name really makes sense. See, when we apply a positive voltage to the gate, it creates this invisible electric field that punches right through that thin oxide layer. This field is like a bouncer at a club. First, it tells all the positive charges in the substrate, we call them holes, to get lost. It repels them, pushing them deep down and out of the way. Then, it sends out an invitation to all the negative electrons hanging out in the source and drain. They get attracted to that positive gate, and they all rush in to fill that empty space. And just like that, they form this thin, conductive bridge of electrons, an N-channel, that connects the source and drain. Boom! Our switch is now primed and ready to go.
But, this channel doesn't just appear with any tiny bit of voltage. There's a tipping point. You need to apply enough voltage to get the job done, to attract enough electrons to actually form that bridge. And that minimum gate voltage needed to do the trick, that's what we call the threshold voltage, or just VT. For most of these little guys, it's a really small number, maybe between 0.3 and 1 volt. If you're below that threshold, it's a no-go, nothing happens. But once you cross it, the channel is officially open for business.
Now, what happens after we cross that threshold is what's really important for controlling things. Any voltage you apply to the gate that's above that minimum VT is called the overdrive voltage. Think of this as your control knob, like a dimmer switch for a light. The more overdrive voltage you apply, the more electrons you suck into that channel, and the stronger and more conductive that bridge becomes. This is literally how we control just how much the transistor is turned on.
All right, so our bridge exists. We've created the channel. Now it's time to actually get some traffic flowing across it. Let's talk about controlling the current.
So to get electrons to actually move across that bridge, we need to give them a little push. We do that by applying a second voltage, this time between the drain and the source. We call this one VDS. Now, if this VDS voltage is pretty small, the MOSFET acts in a really simple, predictable way. The channel just behaves like a resistor. And the best part? The value of that resistance is set by our overdrive voltage. The more overdrive, the lower the resistance, and the more current flows. We call this the triode region.
But this is where things get really, really interesting. What happens when we start to crank up that VDS, that voltage between the drain and source? Well, as it gets bigger, it actually starts to fight against the gate's electric field, but only at the drain end. This warps the channel, making it skinnier and skinnier at that end until poof, it literally gets pinched off. Now you'd think that would stop the current dead in its tracks, right? A broken bridge? But that's not what happens.
And this next part is, well, it's pretty much the secret sauce behind most analog electronics. The moment that channel pinches off, the current just levels out. It hits a plateau. It saturates. It's wild. You can keep increasing the drain voltage, but the current just doesn't care anymore. It stays constant. Why? Because the flow is now totally limited by how many electrons the gate is supplying to the channel. And what controls that? Only our gate voltage. The MOSFET has just transformed into an almost perfect voltage-controlled current source. So let's just do a quick recap of the 3 different personalities this little device can have. First, there's cutoff. That's when the gate voltage is too low and it's just an open switch. It's off. Then there's the triode region, where it acts like a variable resistor that we can tune with the gate. And finally, there's saturation, where it turns into that amazing voltage-controlled current source. And which personality it decides to show us all just depends on that magic combination of the gate and drain voltages.
Okay, this NMOS transistor is obviously amazing on its own, but it has a partner, a perfect counterpart that takes it from just a clever component to being the literal foundation of all modern electronics. Let's talk about the elegant partnership known as CMOS.
You see, the NMOS rarely works alone. It has a partner in crime, the PMOS, or P-channel MOSFET. And it's basically its perfect opposite, like a mirror image or a yin to its yang. Everything is flipped. It's built on an N-type substrate, its current is carried by positive holes, and it turns on with a negative gate voltage. But you don't have to memorize all that. Here's the simple takeaway. The NMOS turns on when the gate voltage is high. The PMOS turns on when the gate voltage is low. They are perfectly, beautifully complementary.
And when you take these two opposites, the NMOS and the PMOS, and you fabricate them right next to each other on the same chip, you get what's called CMOS technology, complementary MOS. And this is the undisputed heavyweight champion of the entire digital world. The reason why is just pure genius.
So here's the magic of CMOS. You arrange these NMOS and PMOS transistors in pairs, and because they're opposites, in any stable state, whether it's representing a digital 1 or a 0, one of the transistors is on, but its partner is always off. Think about what that means. It means there's never ever a direct path from your power supply straight to the ground. There's always a closed gate in the way. And the result? The circuit uses practically zero power when it's not actively switching. This isn't just a neat trick, it's revolutionary. This is the reason your phone's battery can last all day.
So there you have it. We went from a simple switch controlled by an electric field to this revolutionary power-saving duo that literally powers our world. We've built everything, our entire modern society, by cramming billions and billions of these things onto tiny chips of silicon. But as we keep shrinking them, down to the very edge of what's physically possible, you have to wonder, what happens when we just can't make them